Good evening, everybody. This is Nevin Gusak, your host on the Populist Patriot, and my co-host Herschel Miller. How you doing today, Herschel?
Oh, I'm doing good today, Nevin. It's always a pleasure to get on here and talk to you.
Yeah, things have been a bit of a, pardon my language, a shit show in the United States, but we are going to talk about where we stand on a variety of issues because we want to give the viewers an idea of exactly what we stand for and what we don't stand for. So I wanted to go over a variety of economic, social, political, and foreign policy and national security issues that we're facing and for everyone, for the viewers and listeners to have an idea of where we stand. So I'm gonna throw out an issue uh, that I'd like you to start with, Herschel, and that would be political reform, which would include, of course, lobbying, campaign finance, the type of government we would like to see, and things of that nature. So I'm going to let you start off. I'm going to put you in the hot seat. I'm going to call
Okay.
you Hot Seat Herschel.
Yeah. Well, I guess since I'm on the spot and I got to summarize a little bit, if you had to, the model of government that I'm striving for is the New Deal Rooseveltian uh, American federal government, which is a government that seeks to balance the need of industry and capital with labor and your everyday civilian or citizen. Um, it's a government that doesn't seek to smother the small business owner, but also doesn't seek to smother the big business. It's a government that is very dedicated to national security and defense spending, but not neoconservative, war hawkery. It's not about invading everybody for resources or regime change.
Mm-hmm.
It's a government that takes center stage in world affairs, but doesn't stick our nose where it doesn't belong. A government that leads Western democracy forward against forces like authoritarian Russia and authoritarian China and other allies to them. It's a government that takes care of its citizens but gives them enough freedom to take care of their make decisions on their own.
Mm-hmm.
It's setting an environment where all are given the opportunity to succeed, but we're not picking winners and losers with everybody either.
Mm-hmm.
It's a it's a balanced form of government that's not too far right, that's not too far left, that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
that believes in markets but also believes in social welfare, that believes in helping you up but also not just throwing money away. That
Mm-hmm.
invests heavily in science and education and literature and in the nation's culture, the nation's heart, that takes care of its soldiers, that takes care of its people. It's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people that are dedicated to making sure that my kids, my grandkids, and my great grandkids will grow up in a better world than I did. What do you think, Nevin?
No, I agree with you. In fact, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you first, your position, your personal positions based on patriotic populism on a variety of more specific things like veterans affairs or national security, the threats abroad, and then you're going to ask me in return my thoughts on those issues too. Because I think you stated this podcast's view of how the government should be run and the functions and purpose of government very, very well. So I'm going to start out with what is your feeling on campaign finance reform? Do you think there should be campaign finance reform? Do you think there should be not?
Oh, definitely. We need campaign finance reform just about as bad as we need healthcare reform and education reform. And
Mm-hmm.
in fact, I would go so far as to say that we need campaign finance reform before we need anything else. The
Mm-hmm.
fact of the matter is that if you run a democracy where the richest people win every time, then that's not a democracy, that's a plutocracy.
Mm-hmm.
If the wealthy aristocrats are the ones that are in control of a country all the time, then why even have a democratic process? And the
Mm-hmm.
fact is that Republicans consistently outperform Democrats by means of spending alone in a majority of races across the country. And then when you break it down even further than that, rich Democrats beat poor Democrats. Rich Republicans beat poor Republicans. Third parties have literally no chance of winning an election simply based off the fact that they have no hope of outraising and outspending bigger parties. I mean, the Libertarian Party is not a broke party, but their yearly income as compared to the Republican National Committee, it's night and day. We have to take steps in this country now to implement two major solutions to campaign finance reform. We must restrict it that corporations and other it's not nonprofits, I'm saying, but only people, only individuals should be allowed to donate to the federal government, or to campaigns, sorry, not the federal government, should be allowed to donate to campaigns, and it should be restricted to a certain amount that a single person can give. The other side of that, and I have believed this for a long time, that if a person gets enough signatures to run for office, they should be given a certain amount of money to help finance their campaign. And what I believe this would do is it would help people that are not in a position to either take on lobbyists, which is what we're trying to avoid in the first place, or have the money already to run a race, because elections are expensive. It costs hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to win small state races, much less, federal races. So, in France, they do, I believe they do campaign funds, but they also do guaranteed airtime for candidates that get to go on TV, and they have a certain amount of time every day, or not every day, but they have a certain amount of time that allows them to voice, give their stance, give their platform, allow people to hear what they have to say.
Yeah.
But I believe, like I said, until we can get campaign finance reform down, I do not believe that many of the issues that are facing this country today can be solved, because we simply will not have the right people in government to solve these problems. So, Nevin, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
What do you think was the biggest failure, the biggest reasons that the United States has messed up so bad on foreign policy following World War II?
Well, I think there were a couple of items here with foreign policy. By the way, you pretty much summarized my views regarding, for the most part, campaign finance. The only thing I would add is I would also take a look at shortening the period of how long candidates could run for office. Instead of making it a 1 to 2 year affair, let's make it 6 months, and that will also cut the costs involved in launching and running a campaign. And they do that in other free countries in Europe, for example. And I would also take a look, as you said, taking a look at public funding of elections. I would take a look at that. And I would also definitely continue to keep the limits of campaign contributions to $2,500. One-time campaign contributions, that's it. Without corporations or labor unions or nonprofits donating money. Moving to foreign policy, I think you have a couple of things here. You have this, number one is greed. Corporate greed is a big thing. Two is this notion, at least during the Cold War and even today, where we can play one enemy of the United States against the other. We did that in the Cold War during China and the Soviet Union, even though China and the Soviet Union, many occasions, worked behind the scenes and were on the same sides on various issues, such as the Vietnam War, to take an obvious example. The Trump administration tried to there were forces in the Trump administration, and this is documented, that tried to play Russia against China to align the United States with Putin's Russia against China, which is, again, repeating history that has failed, because what has happened, of course, is that we built China into a massive power, in the name of playing China against the Soviet Union during the Cold War from about the early 1970s, the Nixon administration, till the George Herbert Walker Bush administration. And in my opinion, it's clearly was not a good idea, because China and Russia, as I said, they work behind the scenes with each other on many, many, many different conflicts against the West during the Cold War and the period afterwards. So I think there's this notion, this misguided notion, that the enemy of my enemy is my only true friend strategy, that it really does not work in many circumstances. And I can give other examples of that. And we even tried it to the Trump administration. There were elements that even wanted to do that, pitting Russia against China. And obviously, that's not going to work because they're united against the United States. And thirdly, I think there was a lack of national unity, and there was also on the home front. The government never really did a counter propaganda or a campaign to really bring the American population to understand why we were fighting in Vietnam, why we were fighting in Iraq. I'm not saying whether I agree with agree with our involvement in those conflicts or not. That's just something that I've noticed as a historian, or non-professional historian, because I don't have my PhD in history, but I do have my bachelor's degree in history, honors, and political science. So the viewers know part of my academic credentials. And then fourthly, an extreme amount of neoconservative type interventionism throughout the world. I'm not saying we should have engaged with Gaddafi's Libya, for example. I'm not saying we should have engaged with Saddam's Iraq or Taliban held in Afghanistan. In fact, those are countries we should have obviously never recognized, and we broke diplomatic relations with Iraq during the first Gulf War, and we never recognized the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. And under George W. Bush, we reopened diplomatic relations with Gaddafi's Libya. I don't think we should have provided any military equipment or trade to those regimes, and diplomatic relations could have been handled in third countries. But it doesn't mean, just because these governments were all hostile to American interests, doesn't mean that going into these countries, even if they have WMDs or not, or supporting terrorism, was the proper way to deal with those issues. And to me, I think the United States at times has become too trigger happy, even if the stated cause was supposedly noble. And we left Iraq and Libya and Afghanistan arguably in just as bad shape, if not even worse shape in certain ways, than the time before, in some ways. And certainly it's proven to be a quagmire for the citizens of those countries as well as American forces. So, again, to recap, you have corporate greed, which supports our enemies, which pushes the American government to adopt contradictory policies towards our adversaries. B, neoconservative hyper-interventionism. C, you have this misguided notion that the strategy of the enemy of my enemy is my only true friend. And I think that's pretty much it. Those are the big ones. Those are the top ones, at least, to recap. That's where we failed in our foreign policy or have problems.
Another point that I would have made, or I would make on that, one of the biggest issues that I've seen people have with American foreign policy post 9/11, especially, is that we went on this campaign across the world against terrorism. We toppled Libya for funding terrorism. We toppled Syria for funding terrorism. We toppled Iraq for funding terrorists. At least these were issues that were given to the American people. Now, I'm not in any way going to sit here and say that those nations were not doing that, because obviously there's enough evidence out there to show that all of these regimes have in one way or another contributed to world terrorism. But what I will say is this: it is very hypocritical for us to have toppled those nations and allow Saudi Arabia, a fundamentalist Muslim theocracy, to continue to exist, and not only exist, but to be one of our key allies in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia has committed crimes on the magnitude or worse than every one of those countries listed. I mean, they
Yes.
are still executing homosexuals in the street. They are
Mhm.
still very, very, I mean, to possibly the most extreme degree seen in the 20th century, fundamentalist,
Mhm.
fundamentally religious. And it rings hollow is what the problem is that if the United States is going to try to take up the banner of the leader of freedom and democracy and peace throughout the world, well, it ought to really check who its friends are. There's
Mhm.
no, it's always been said is that you can judge a man by the company he keeps. Well,
Very
if the
true.
United States is best friends with one of the world's most oppressive regimes, that is as far from democracy as you can possibly get in the world today outside of North Korea, then don't expect people to take your hollow platitude seriously.
Well, and we've had that problem ever since, really, even before World War II, where we aligned ourselves with fascistic dictatorships, some of which didn't even necessarily fully like us or agreed with our political and economic system. I mean, you take a look at General Rafael Trujillo, who ruled the Dominican Republic from 1930 until 1961. I mean, that's a perfect example. And you have other leaders like President Anastasio Somoza Garcia and Anastasio Somoza Deval. You have General Batista and Fulgencio Batista in Cuba, Chiang Kai-shek in China. I mean, we've aligned ourselves in the name of fighting, communism. Supposedly, in certain respects, we've aligned ourselves with fascistic regimes in the name of the Cold War against China and the Soviet Union, particularly in its early days. And we continue to do that well into the 1980s. Saudi Arabia is another example of one of our highly questionable Cold War allies. Not only was it an absolute monarchy and a theocracy that was based on principles explicitly anti Western, they also supported various terrorist movements, including ones that were aligned with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. They supported, for example, Hamas, which wasn't aligned with the Soviet Union, but it was anti American, and they supported the PLO. The Saudis supported the pro Soviet Ba'athist dictatorships in Syria and in Iraq, Sadat's Egypt. They supplied even one of its neighbors with some aid and trade, like communist South Yemen. And the United States poured in all kinds of massive technology to the Saudi absolute monarchy. It was highly brutal. The economy was kind of centralized and had certain socialistic characteristics where the state owned a lot of different economic sectors and industries. And, that was part and parcel of the whole dictatorial structure that they have in Saudi Arabia. They had a religious police very similar to what the Taliban had in Afghanistan, called the Mutawas, that were absolutely brutal and committed brutal human rights abuses. Fast forward later, under the Trump administration, he has aligned America even closer to the Saudis, despite his legitimate criticism of Saudi Arabia during his 2016 campaign, to the point where he actually allowed the production of high tech bombs in Saudi Arabia. In a sense, almost outsourced that production to Saudi Arabia. And, that really begs the question, if you, let's say, pro Iranian extremists take over in Saudi Arabia, they're going to inherit that advanced American technology, which could arguably tip the balance of power in the entire Middle East. And the Saudi Arabian government continues its mass human rights violations. They executed an American journalist of Saudi nationality, if you will, Khashoggi. The list is endless about the horrors and the brutality of Saudi Arabia, but it's really not unusual for American allies to do that. In some cases, some of these American allies, as I talked about with Saudi Arabia, they'll have a two-track policy. They'll at times attack American interests. They've harassed American servicemen and CIA stations in Saudi Arabia. They have launched at times anti-Western, anti-American campaigns. I cover this in my writings, at least two of my books, including my recent one, Turning the Page, where I describe how Saudi Arabia had kind of a dual track policy when handling relations with the United States. So I think that's an excellent point you bring up. I'm glad you did.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So, well, what's your question for me now?
What is your stance on economics? Are you for free enterprise capitalism? Are you for a form of socialism? Are you a dirty red or some racist piece of crap fascist? Where are you in the scheme of things?
Oh, well, I mean, I took down my Huey Long flag in the back, so kind of hard to. No, it's like all things in life, it's complicated. And for me, anybody that's masquerading around to know all of the answers of how to fix the economy into the most perfect, balanced, fair, and growing economy in the world, they're liars or they're idiots.
Well, let me interject. I don't mean to be rude. One thing I want to make clear to the audience, our program we understand that our program is not it's not going to achieve a utopian society. Achieving a utopian society is impossible. It has never been achieved in human history as far as I know. So I just wanted to add that, but please continue.
Well,
Thank
that's
you
a good
for
point.
indulging me.
That's a good point, and that is what I'm going to get at is what I propose, what I believe in is not to make everything perfect, not to get rid of all the lazy people or to throw money at us until we're all driving Lamborghinis and living in mansions. That's an unreasonable goal. What I believe is that every single situation to do with the economy should be treated as an individual policy point with an overarching strategy. Now, my overarching strategy is to build an economy that is long-term sustainable, that has opportunities built into it for people to advance through the social classes. My goal is not to get rid of poor people because, well, first of all, poor can be relative, but beyond that, even if we eliminated all of the poverty, which is a goal that I think we should strive for, the fact is that some people just make bad decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Some people cannot get out of their own way to not be poor. Now, that's not me saying that people that are poor deserve to be, because look, I don't make a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
I bring maybe $350, $400 a week in on my check, and I work 50 hours a week. So I'm not sitting here saying that by any means that poor people are always responsible. What I am saying is, getting back to the point, you can't fix every situation. You can't fix every sob story. What you can do is give everybody the best possible chance to get themselves out of the situation they're in and into a better one. So, in the specific ways, I can list a couple of examples to give you a feel. So, I believe that we should examine the regulations that we have in place on businesses making, I'd say, less than $500,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of my starting point. We cannot treat mom and pop's grocery shop like Walmart.
No.
If you hold mom and pop shop to the same standards as you do mega corporations will always win in the end. And you've seen that since Ronald Reagan. Look around you and see how many small businesses have died over the last 10 years, how many homegrown restaurants there are even left, or slaughter or butcher shops, or delis, or small grocery stores, or just small businesses as a general rule are dying. And they were dying before the pandemic.
Yes.
So we have to look at them people and say, how can we help you? How can we make it where you can make a better living? Now, my stepdad runs a trucking company, or sort of. But one of the reasons that he has had so much trouble over the last couple of years is over-regulation of the small trucking industry. What I mean by that
Mhm.
is there are regulations in place that people like my stepdad simply cannot meet. It would cost too much money for them to be able to run that company at a profit and meet all the regulations. So you have to cut employees, to cut, regulations with employees. You have to drive less. You have to do all these things that make it harder to get ahead, simply because if you tried to get ahead, you would lose your business entirely. You know, I think that, but on the flip side of that, large corporations have to be held to a higher standard. We need to have laws in place to guarantee that larger businesses don't turn into monopolies, that larger businesses don't start implementing more anti-competitive practices as a general rule. I think we should be more strict about company mergers for one thing.
Yes.
And and these are things that they're high-minded goals. They're not easy, and I'm not offering the exact way to get there. What I'm saying is these are goals to get to. But if this country is to survive, we have to develop an economy different than the one we have now. It has to be an
Mhm.
economy more focused on the lower levels, more diverse, smaller owned businesses. Because what you're seeing right now is, as Walmart, Amazon, Target, and other major chain stores, well, thereabouts, large companies are dominating the marketplace. What does Amazon own? Over 70 or 80% of the online market share.
They pretty
I mean,
much have monopolized the online market for a
yeah,
long
how do you
time.
even begin to compete with that? The point is that as companies are, through what corporate Darwinism, if you will, have consolidated and bought more and purchased more and become larger, they are simply swallowing, or they are simply like a tree taking all the nutrients out of the ground around it, are depriving and destroying small businesses across the country. And it
Yeah, I
won't be
agree.
that long until we live in a country that it is feasibly likely to assume, or reasonably likely to assume, that the largest percentage of businesses will be chain stores owned
Yeah,
by a very small selection of mega rich corporations.
and that's where we're headed.
And that will topple the country. That will be the point that this country has died, because it's not an American dream if nobody can live it.
Hmm.
you know. And what my warning is to the free market fundamentalist is that if you don't fix this system now, they will burn you out of your homes. To the wealthy, Hamptonites, these people that are on the bottom rungs of society's economic ladder don't want to stay there forever. And they took it on the chin in 2008 when we handed billions of dollars to the larger banks that were the ones that caused the destruction in the first place. And they took it on the chin this year when they lost their jobs, their livelihoods, their small businesses that might have been in the family for generations, and was given pocket change in return. Next time, they won't take it. There'll be guillotines going down the street and looking for people that are responsible, and that is the wealthy bankers, that is the large corporations that have exported jobs overseas and computerized the manufacturing process. That is, Wall Street executives. That is speculators. That's these people that have benefited the most, who have seen the largest increase in their wealth over the period of the last 40 years since Reagan, will be the people that find their head on the chopping block if they don't change it now. I think Tucker Carlson, for whatever it's worth, I'm not a big fan of his. He did say something right a couple of years ago. In an interview with Ben Shapiro, he told Ben Shapiro that these people that have been disenfranchised and have lost everything but their vote, they will use that vote to punish you. They will take out their vengeance and their anger and their indignation on you. And what I'm hoping to do, and in a lot of ways, Huey Long is a guy that I kind of model some of my economic views after, is to avoid all of that, avoid the bloodshed, avoid the guillotines, avoid the absolute insurrection that is brewing in this country, and fix it now. it's routine maintenance economy, or or an economy that has routine maintenance. I would say would be the best way to get ahead of the problems before they go from a small issue into a nation destroying event. And I believe that we are running out of time as a nation to do this. Because if you turn on the news and you look out the window at what's happening in Washington and what's happened across cities all over the country with the various protests and riots, it's only going to take a spark. And you never know where a spark's going to come from like that. It could be tomorrow, for all we know. But my dad, I've heard this saying a long time ago. My grandpa, he gave it to me, and he told me, he said, if you're in front of a train, get out of the way. And that's what I believe we have to do. We are standing on the tracks right now, and the train is right around the corner. And if we don't move, we're done. Now, I know that was long-winded. I kind of moved off the topic, Nevin, but what do you think about
No,
that?
that's perfect. No, no, no. I mean, and that's the thing you said earlier in your earlier in your discussion and your points that you made. You mentioned that these are very complicated issues, and you can't just boil it down into just one sound point, because something like creating a new political system or commenting on foreign policy or how the economy should be structured, it's very complicated. In the case of the economy, there are differing interest groups that need to be appeased. They all have legitimate points. They all have legitimate concerns. I think the economic system, or really the federal government, one of the things that when managing or guiding or incentivizing behaviors in the economic sectors, really and truly is balancing the interests of labor and management, labor and capital, the employees, employers, whatever you want to call it. We need to take a look on the one hand, and Philip K. Howard points this out in his book called The Death of Common Sense. There are regulations that do afflict, and particularly independent businesses, that are insane. And I don't mean to sound like a lawbird, which is, a term used to describe a libertarian, but I mean, they do have a point regarding that. And you highlighted some personal examples of where legitimate independent businesses are needlessly penalized because of that. Now, I'm not saying small and medium-sized businesses should be free of regulations, but it has to be based on common sense. On the other hand, the larger corporations and corporations that really truly engage in bad behavior tend to be incentivized. One of the areas that I would like to see is a moratorium on all mergers and acquisitions, and seriously efforts to decentralize the monopoly capitalist economy that we have, so we can have true free enterprise. I think you hit those points very well, because if we did have a country of small entrepreneurs in different communities, not only are you going to have an increased sense of, work ethic or continued work ethic, but you're also going to have stronger communities. We all remember the community local from our childhood, at least I do, the local community banks, the local diners, the local pizza joint, or the local toy store or stationery stores. I mean, the owners and the workers of those companies tended to be pillars in the community. It was one of the things, or one of the glue that connected the community. So you have a higher purpose in that respect. On the other hand, we also have to have justice for labor. I mean, just Google this, I say to the audience. I mean, it's very well documented. The wages of average American workers and even white-collar professionals, I mean, have been frozen or falling in most cases, and that decreases our purchasing power. So in order for people to afford the basic necessities of life, they have to take out loans, they have to use their credit cards, and that's been proliferating since starting in the 1980s. So that needs to be addressed. And then we also need to reindustrialize the United States and revitalize and continue to revitalize research and development. It's not to say we have no industry and no research and development here, but that needs to be strengthened to a level of the pre-Reagan era where we really were trailblazing. I mean, this is the country that sent the first man to the moon. We were a pioneer in the development of computers, the development of steel, even automobiles. We need to get our act together, and that's going to require a harmonization of free enterprise based on private property and competition. But it's also going to take, the proper federal and state and local governments incentivizing production at the expense of excessive financial speculation. And we're going to have to take a look at, our trade policy and our immigration policy to work for the American national economy. And tariffs is an important component of this, but it's not the only component. In my opinion, in addition to tariffs, we have to also seriously enforce Buy America for procurement by state, local, and the federal governments. We have to take a look at possibly nationalizing the Federal Reserve, and I'm plagiarizing this idea in a sense from Alexander Hamilton, who called for the development of a government-owned national bank chartered by the Congress amongst other things, to disperse credits. And anybody who tells me that government-owned banks don't work in the United States, well, I challenge you to look at the success of the Bank of North Dakota, for example, which has a state bank owned by the state government. And then thirdly, what I would
Republican
also,
state too. Tell that to the viewers. Deeply Republican state, North Dakota.
well, in fact, several Republican politicians, including one of the senator from North Dakota, Senator Hoeven, was also a very good administrator of the Bank of North Dakota, incidentally. So, and the other items, of course, is infrastructure. We need to massively increase our infrastructure and improve it. I would look at in the rural areas, I would look at high-speed broadband. I would take a look at also converting parts of Amtrak potentially into high-speed rail. Continue the highway improvement projects, of course, and I would also look at, if needed, improving freight rail. And one area close to home, back in the greater New York City area, there are certain waterways that are not adequately dredged that allow barges to bring their products and raw materials to businesses. And that's a huge cost for businesses. It costs more for businesses to truck the goods, to bring their raw materials in by truck, than to bring it by barge and tug. So that's another thing. And lastly, I would take a look at also a partial free, so-called free college university program, but I would only do it for certain majors that would nurture talents needed for the reindustrialization of the United States. And that would include engineering, medicine, physics, and welding and other blue collar trades that are needed also potentially for the reindustrialization effort. So I would really take a look at that. And then also another point is I would also take a look at a lot of the baby boomers out there who used to work in now dormant or dying industries, and have the federal government potentially look into their Social Security records, Medicare records, the IRS records, see who worked for long dormant companies that don't exist anymore or that are struggling, and recruit them back and give them various financial incentives to provide advice to serve as consultants to rebuild these new industries. And this is one of the things that I really have to reject, a lot of the libertarian free market purism, which is also embraced by conservatives. And this is where the Trump administration missed the boat, because he put a lot of those government is always the problem type people as an administration. It's going to take a whole of government strategy with various government agencies working together with certain private sector actors, unions, businesses that are very patriotic or loyal to the United States, universities. It's going to take a truly national effort to bring this about. And it could take like at least 5 or 10 years, and that's being overly optimistic. And it's funny, I had like a comment that was made on the American Solidarity Party, a very good comment, where people were worried, oh, you're a nationalist, there's no place with the American Solidarity Party. These were people on the left. And I understand what they were saying, because when I responded very nice and validated their concerns, they opened up. They said, oh, because nationalism is commonly associated with Trumpian politics. And that's where, and we'll talk about this more in the show about the 2020 election, but that's where Trumpianism failed, because our nationalism is not about, well, America is right all the time, is great all the time, that America has always done the right thing, or America always has the answers, or is superior to the world. I mean, I want to really drum into the audience. Our brand of nationalism is predicated on continuous improvement, making America the best possible nation by using what worked in the past and by basically using other countries' experiences, grafting their policies onto ours. So what are your thoughts about what I just said?
Well, there at the end, I think you hit the nail exactly on the head about our brand of nationalism. Now, I don't know where I sit on the political spectrum anymore. And I'm not sure that I would always consider myself a nationalist. But for what I am nationalistic, or what I do claim to be a nationalist, is my goal is to make this country the best it can possibly be by any means necessary. Left, right, center, or taking policies from other countries, like you said, that worked. It's not about beating the war drums about how America is so great, about how America is, God's gift to creation. It's about understanding that we as a nation have to band together and look at this problem united to understand even to where to begin to fix this, because it's a mess right now. And turn on the news and look out the window and see how bad everything is. This problem is not a Democratic problem, a Republican problem, a Libertarian problem, or an American Solidarity Party problem. It's an American problem. And that what I hope, I speak for Nevin on this, I know I do. What our goal here is at the Patriotic Populist is to unify Americans from across the political spectrum that are interested in building in a better American, or a better America. People that are maybe from diverging backgrounds, but united in one purpose, that I want this country to be better than it's ever been. I don't want to restore the United States. I don't want to make America great again. I want to make America better tomorrow. I want America to be better than it was yesterday. Almost looking at it like a personal improvement goal. One of the things that my coaches always told me is be better today than you was yesterday, and tomorrow be better than you are today. For this country, I don't have any aspirations of taking the United States back to the 1950s. I've got no interest in conservatism for the sake of conservatism, and I have no interest in progress for the sake of progress. What I want to do is build this country to be the greatest symbol of hope and democracy, and support the greatest economy, the greatest military, the greatest infrastructure. What I want to do is to say to the world that if you unite your people, if you rally around the same banner, if you all aspire under the same goal, that anything is possible, that we can accomplish great things together. And it all starts, especially with the economy, with individual people saying that I have to do what it takes for me to build a better country, or I have to do what I can to help build a better economy. I think that one of the things that we can do as a country is to build, to invest more locally. Look, the government's not going to come in riding on a white horse anytime soon to save us. As much as Me and Nevin would love that to happen. To have this populist government that springs forth out of the ashes of the Trump presidency and saves America. It's probably not going to happen. And we'll talk more about this on the next week's election special. But the fact of the matter is that if we have any hope of fixing these problems in this country today, we have to do it ourselves. I mean, right now, obviously, our goal is to build a political movement in the country. But right now, one of the things that I try to do is shop local. One of the things that I, try to do is to look and see where stuff was made. And I can't always do it, but it's stuff like that that you can do, that the viewer can do right now without waiting for the government to come help you. Nevin, I know that you're real big on small businesses. What's some ways that you've helped kind of stimulate the small businesses in your area?
Well, I mean, starting off, I tend to shop at various local businesses and regional chains. I'll go to Bravo Supermarket, for example, which is a more of a regional business. I'll go to local restaurants when I can, the local pizza parlor, some of the local Latin American restaurants. My girlfriend and I, she's of Dominican extraction. We'll go to even Korean and Japanese restaurants that are local in this area. The local businesses tend to, in the case of restaurants especially, tend to be superior in the quality of the food. They tend to put a lot of love in their cooking, fresh ingredients. But, living in also a small city in a metropolitan area, it's also hard to avoid the large malls and the large monopolies. I try not to shop at Walmart as much as possible. I mean, if I need to get something there that they only have, I will, but I try to minimize my contact with them. I tend to also I try to conduct businesses at socially minded businesses. There's a very good restaurant chain down here called the Dutch Pot. They serve and make Jamaican food that's excellent. They have very progressive and enlightened labor policies towards their workforce. Um, so that's one example. I'll sometimes go to Costco, which is another company that treats their workers very, very well, where there's high levels of worker satisfaction. And then I'll just go to the local businesses and local restaurants, as a matter of fact. So that's very, very critical. Small businesses and other types of independent businesses of all sizes are very important for communities and very important for the country. And I think your earlier statement that you made were very much on point. I think, you see, our nationalism is based, as I said, on continuous improvement and not resting on my laurels. And I'm going to mention something very personal. Back in early 2017, my right coronary artery was 100% blocked. And the other coronary arteries, and I'm 46, so this happened when I was in my early 40s. And the other coronary arteries were 20 to 40%. Over time, really starting in early 2019, I lost between a total of 20 to 30 pounds. I lift weights and do cardio exercise more often than not 4 times a week, bare minimum 3 times a week. I've eaten better, vast improvements in that front. I could have rested on my laurels and looked at my old pictures and said, hey, I was in great shape in 2008. I was really thin and built and everything else. But no, my life was really in danger. And I wasn't resting on my laurels. And I decided to improve myself. And I listened finally to the information and the advice out there, and I improved myself. And I think there's a parallel with the United States. The United States, for a first world country, is dying on a lot of fronts. It's a declining nation in many ways. And just like I was declining on the health front, slowly but surely. And we have a choice. I had a choice, just like the country has a choice, to turn the corner or not. And that's, kind of how I look at the situation we're facing. I make some parallels with myself. And that's why I say our nationalism is not based on xenophobia or reflexive fear of all foreign countries or foreigners or anything like that. We just want to take what works and absorb it into our own system. Because the way I define a nation is its people, certain common cultures that all races more or less agree to, the fact that we are rooted in our communities and the soil and the nation. And, I'll add one thing to push ahead when it comes to race and gender, for example. Our patriotic populism embraces all races and genders because when it comes to the adversaries, or if you want to say the enemies of patriotic populism or radical civic nationalism, whether it's Marxism, Leninism, whether it's National Socialism, fascism, or unrestrained corporate capitalism. They don't care what gender you are, or they don't care what race. Well, they do care what they sometimes will care what race you are, but at the end of the day, they're going to oppress us and or harm our nation and our society in very profound ways. And they'll do everything to take down the power of the United States and to prevent us from becoming a more unified country. So we are truly all, as I said in previous broadcasts, we're all in this together. And we have to, again, look at continuous improvement, not utopia. But I speak to some people who are very intelligent and they say, well, you can't achieve a utopia, you can't achieve utopia. That phrase should also not be an excuse to just do nothing and just to allow the nation to collapse or just to accept things the way they are because it's just the force of nature. I refuse to accept that. That's just, to me, with all due respect, a load of crap. So I just wanted to finish that point and to add on to your previously stated points that you made.
Well, I think there's, because I know we got to move on here in a minute, but that's such a good way of saying that about that we're all in this together. And that gets said a lot. Politicians love that. We're all one big family, all in this together. And the fact is, for the most part, they're never telling the truth. And I'm not going to say here because I think that one of the things that I haven't liked that's come out, the last couple of years is the conservative response of saying that I don't see race, I don't see class, I don't see, but they're maybe they're meaning that with well intention, but there is different races and there is different classes and there is different sexual orientations of people. And the fact is,
Mm-hmm.
if we don't look at the situation again, like I said about the economy, on a case by case basis, what is the problems plaguing the black community in Chicago, or the
Mm-hmm.
black community in Los Angeles, or the Asian community in San Francisco, or the Latin community across the Southwest, or you have to get representatives of these people.
Yes.
You have to talk to them, and not just talk because people talk a lot, but to listen, to try to understand what are these people going through. And this goes for the poor people out in Appalachia, or the disenfranchised in West Memphis, or the oppressed in New York City. This to get these people together, because one of the things that I've noticed in my political journeys is my life growing up was a lot closer to a poor person, a poor miner from West Virginia, or a poor black kid from Memphis, than it was, for some suburbanite in San Francisco. I dealt with bad cops, with lack of jobs, with dismal options of going forward, and with an education system that's underfunded, with a bad infrastructure system. Like, these are problems that I dealt with that I share with people across this country. And I think that if there was anything that I could accomplish with this, if I only could get one thing, it would be to unite the people that fit them descriptions into understanding that I'm in this with you, that I'm a union electrician, well, actually, electrician's apprentice, in one of the poorest local unions in the country, or at least for our union. I know what it's like. I've been there. I know what it's like to work for nothing, to work long hours, to feel like your options in life are limited, that there's too many barriers between you and your goal. I understand. Nevin here, he come from a different background than I did, but it's one of the things that I've always appreciated is he seems closer to me than, like I said, a lot of other people that I know that he's rubbed shoulders with. We understand you. We understand your problems. We understand what it's like to grow up in a system that you feel like you have no voice in, no real way of changing the corruption or the greed or the just outright unfairness of the system. It's none of this is easy. Me and Evan, we can talk. We can have a 5-hour show every night for the next 10 years and talk about every issue. But the fact is that until we start to understand that we as a people are the ones responsible for fixing this problem, nothing is ever going to change. It takes individuals from all across the country standing up together and saying that we have to do something and we have to do it now. That we can't stand around and wait and wait and wait some more.
I agree with you 110%. And that leads me to 2 points. There also has to be a reawakening of a nationwide empathy where people have empathy for each other. That's really important. We're a very diverse nation, racially, class, and probably religious, sexual orientation. And I think there needs to be empathy for people of goodwill across those lines. And it disturbs me that within our elites, it seems like based on the policies that they push for, there's a lack of empathy. Because if there was a lot more empathy, particularly by our leadership in corporate America, in the political system, if there was more empathy, we would be living in a very different America. I would submit that as a point. In fact, this is one of the things where the conservative establishment, conservative incorporated, is deaf and blind on. In fact, Ben Shapiro, who I'm going to be honest with you, is a weasel. I do not like him. He gives me a very bad vibe, emanates from Ben Shapiro. I do not like the guy. And that's pretty sad. If I say that I don't like somebody, that's pretty bad. Those of you who are listening who knows me very well, that's bad. But he actually said rather recently in one of his broadcasts and commentary is that empathy in politics is bad. And that to me is emblematic of one of the biggest problems that our national leaders are suffering from. Mitch McConnell is an example of a leader, senator, and up until now, recently, the Senate Majority Leader, total lack of empathy. The other part is there needs to be a shift. I don't know how it's going to come about exactly, but also this is an observation. There needs to be a shift from our elected officials acting like a bunch of political capitalists who are concerned more about re-election. And part of that is because it's such a money-driven system, such a materialistic system, because of course they're waiting on those lucrative lobbying and corporate jobs afterwards, many of our elected officials, not all of them. And I think that's what's behind a lot of this is. But we need to shift from a system of basically political capitalism to that of a leadership that is animated by the ethos of strict fealty to the public good. And that's going to require a cultural shift on the national basis. And I think that can come from real people, everyday people who are smart like you and I, having a chance to enter the political system. I think somebody like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, whether we agree or disagree with her political system, the lady was a political intern for Senator Joe Kennedy and worked with some other, I think, nonprofits, but who also was a bartender. I think her victory was excellent. I would like to see more waiters and bartenders and steel workers and teachers and police officers and librarians and other white collar professionals, white collar workers, your country doctor, and, others, small, truly small business people, true, like, the local diner owner, for example. I'd love to see those people to be senators and congressmen on a national level as well as state legislators and even local leaders. And that's going to require, again, the political reform that we talked about. So, again, I would, two key ingredients to get the leadership that really would be good for this country, in my opinion. There needs to be a reawakening of empathy, particularly in elite circles. And then there also needs to be really also a reawakening amongst our political class and our country to fealty to the public good. Because elite culture has been contaminated by neoliberalism, by this sort of Ayn Rand, Milton Friedman, hyper individualism. It's all about me and just getting ahead, and to the hell with your neighbors and your communities. That needs to be extirpated and that needs to be discredited. And in a future national populist government, I would like to see the government, a future federal government, using the bully pulpit not to suppress the speech of the Milton Friedman types, but to use a big microphone to counter their big microphone and to give a true alternative viewpoint. And that's going to require the power of a patriotic populist or radical civic nationalist state. And that's it. Because, like it or not, that radical civic nationalist government or patriotic populist government is going to be the voice of the people. And I know that's kind of a cliche because a lot of different governments, including bad governments, always claim they're the voice of the people. And that brings me to this new point where I would also love to see leaders, and they do exist out there, I think, with everyday people who truly possess the attributes of humility and being humble and good-hearted individuals. And I do believe, because I do see it, you have a lot of everyday people that are good-hearted people that really want to do the right thing.
Well, Nevin, I'll tell you, I think that we might have bored the audience to death for a little long. I'd like to wrap up on one final thought, though.
Sure.
You know, I've thought a lot lately because I tried my best to get out of politics, and I really, really hate politics because it brings out the worst in people, and it it causes people to forget who they are sometimes, I think. But the one thing that I would encourage people about to say, there's a lot of movements, a lot of world changing movements that have started throughout history that started from nobodies. Nobody knew who Martin Luther King was. Nobody knew who Gandhi was. Nobody knew, you know, these people that have so fundamentally changed the world, that will be remembered for generations or centuries, or maybe even millennia. These people, they were nobodies at one time in their life. And you might feel like a nobody. You might feel like you have no power. You have no authority over your own life. That you have no way of fixing this labyrinthian system of failure and nepotism and greed and incompetence. And at worst, just outright, psychotic government that we've got. But your voice matters to somebody. Here I am. I'm some nobody hillbilly from the middle of nowhere that's never accomplished any great feats in all my life. But right now you're listening to me talk. Nevin, I'm not gonna. I don't know what he's accomplished in his life, but I've never seen him on a national newsletter headline talking about him. But here we are, just two guys talking about what we would like to see in this country, what we would like to push for, what we want to do. Your voice will matter too. If you will connect to people around you, if you'll ignore the TV, ignore Facebook, ignore all of that, because on there, they're designed to get clicks, they're designed to get views, and they talk about the worst aspects of our life. But I'll tell you, if you go talk to your neighbors, if you'll go talk to the people at your gas station, you'll talk to people like that, you'll find that most people aren't that far apart. We all want a better life for us and our kids. We all want a country that is more independent, that is more sustainable than the mess we've got now. So I would encourage you that if you feel like you want to get into politics, feel free to message me on Facebook, to leave comments on this video on the channel, to find our page on Facebook, to do anything. Get a hold of me, email us, but let your voice matters. And every additional voice that we bring into this conversation is another step closer to fixing these problems that we have in this country. I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, black, white, gay, straight, Christian, Catholic, Muslim, or atheist. I want to hear your voice. I want to hear what you have to say, and I want to hear your ideas for fixing stuff. And if I could do nothing else in politics but encourage people to get active in their communities and active around in the government around them, like Nevin said, bartenders, truck drivers, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, school teachers, people that bear the brunt of the successes and failures of this country, that are at the bleeding edge of our nation and all of the ups and downs of it. If there's any hope of us fixing this, it's going to come from us. That we have to make a conscientious decision. And I know I've said it before, and I'll say it again. There's no white horse. There's no Lord of the Rings moment that's just going to magically fix all of these problems. It starts with you. It starts with how you treat those people around you. It starts with how we take the steps necessary to start accomplishing the goals that we want. And if enough people do that, anything's possible. So before I keep rambling on any longer, Nevin, what's your word of optimism or hope for the people that might be listening to this?
I think you said it best. It all starts with us. The famous traditional conservative James Burnham, and he was a former leader in the Trotskyite communist movement who defected from communism. In the 1960s, he was searching for a new elite to help defend the United States and protect us against the Soviet Union during the Cold War, and to renew the United States. And he met a lot of everyday people. He felt big business, corporate America was really failing the nation. And he didn't find really much of an elite with them, meaning possessing the sense of leadership, of noblesse oblige, being protectors of the nation. So he saw that in everyday people. He saw that in your everyday small business person, your workers, your other blue collar, white collar workers and professionals, everyday people. It's going to start with us. It's going to start with engaged people like you and I, who, I guess, to high society, we're considered average nobodies, to the like of a Roger Stone or Mitch McConnell or Jeff Bezos. We're not the movers and shakers. I'll tell you something, the movers and shakers have failed our country for the most part. They really have not only misled our country, they have ruined our country and have basically put us on a path of decline. But my words of hope, based on my own personal experiences, both at my work location, some of the library customers, I'm a library manager by profession, people I just come across, even my own family, my circle of friends, a lot of fine people out there who, given the chance, can really have good input in, developing new policies. And it may be after, God forbid, if there's a catastrophe in the United States and you cause a partial collapse of the government, or if the country fractures into new countries, for example, the United States becomes 3 or 4 separate countries. I think there are a lot of local people out there that really are up to the task for leadership opportunities and for even advising on the development of new policies. So I think, yes, it's not all doom and gloom. America does have a reserve of human talent that, if properly harnessed, well, if properly harnessed, could put us on the path to become a great nation again. And I'd like to close with that. Again, it all starts with us. And I want to thank everybody for listening to the podcast. Make sure you subscribe to our program. Make sure you comment, give us suggestions, feedback, try and keep it polite and professional. Recommend this podcast to friends and family members. I want to thank Herschel for joining us again tonight. I'm probably going to do a recording tomorrow solo that's going to go over some more of the issues we didn't cover tonight. And then we're going to have our election special next weekend. So don't forget to tune in and to listen to our podcast next weekend, because we're going to have probably a very lively discussion. And thank you again. God bless. God bless America. And y'all have a great night.